Okay, so part C, you have to define an integer array named int_cnt, and using the ubound function on the varhist variable defined above, dynamically dimension the int_cnt array to have as many elements as the varhist variable plus 1.
What does the ubound function do again?
So ubound, basically it counts the highest number, like, which is the highest subscript in your entire array. So like if you're like indexing, so if you have like 3 elements here and you would be indexing it as 0, 1, 2. So here the highest subscript for like the highest index is 2.
Okay.
So
Thank
that's
you.
what the ubound gives. And if it's an L bound, it would give you 0.
Perfect. Thank you.
So you just have to be careful that it's not referencing to like the highest value in there. It's referring to the highest subscript of your indexes. Like whatever is the biggest among your indices, that is what it's referring to, and it's not the value 750. It's referring to 0, 1, 2. So here in this case, it's 2. So you are defining an integer. So that's why it's and you're defining a new integer and you're giving ubound of this thing. So this is going to be int n is going to be 2. And you are asked to redimension that thing. And so that's why using read_in int_cnt of int n plus 1, because that has been asked for in your question. So that's why you're doing an int n plus 1. And once you're done with that, you're coming, he's asking you to have an input box which asks for a 3-digit winning lottery number and capture it in a string variable. So what happened for your last exam is a lot of people like didn't pay attention to the fact that he wanted a string variable at some places. So many of you defined it as a range variable, because of which a lot of you lost some 1 or 2 points on that. So just be careful when you read your question, whether like if he actually specifies what variable it has to be defined as. So here it specifically says capture it in a string variable. So make sure you have a string over there. That is, we're defining it as a string variable so that you don't lose points unnecessarily. So you're having an input box and enter a winning 3-digit number. So user enters some 3-digit number there. And in the next part, in part E, it says the winning lottery number string from part D will be returned to cell A1, and in cell B1, the text winning lottery number. That is basically what I just said. You need, if this is what, if I'm entering something like 254, this is going to come in your A1, and winning lottery number is going to come in B1. So that's what you're trying to do in part E. So again, here your reference cell is A1. And with that, you are specifying the range A1. So in A1, so we are printing the user input number in A1. So that is why we're just using a dot value is equal to strw. And then you're doing an offset to the next column, which is B. That is 0 rows and 1 column. So it comes to B1. So that is what is this. And you're just printing the words over there. And in your part F, G, and I. So F says the code will then generate a ticket with a set of 3 random numbers between 0 and 9 using the Excel function ran between and concatenate them into a string variable. So that's what you're doing here. So you are just initializing a variable int row equal to 0. That is just to count the number of rows you would be generating when you're generating your random numbers. It's just to count the number of random numbers you would be generating. So here you're using a do until loop. So you're starting with a do, and strt is equal to cstr of worksheet function dot ran between 0 to 9. So since it is so every time you're trying to generate one random number, and this ant is what is doing your concatenation, that is basically putting them together. So here it generates a random number between 0 to 9. It generates another digit between 0 to 9, and it generates another digit between 0 to 9. And this AND puts them all together. So if this generated 1 and this generated like 2 and this generated 3, you're going to get 1, 2, 3 together. And he wants you to store it as a string. So that is why we are using CSTR for each of the numbers we generate, so that we are converting. CSTR is basically convert to string variables. So once it generates a number over here, you are trying to convert it to a string so that you can concatenate it and put it together. So that's why you have a CSTR on each one of it, because he has specifically mentioned in the question that you need to have it as, concatenate them into a string variable. So since he has specifically mentioned that, you need to specifically do that. So that's why you have CSTR here. And int row equal to int row plus 1. So that is, so it starts at 0. So once you have one number, it's counting as 1. 0 plus 1, that's 1. And as you progress through the loop, it counts all the number of rows you generate. And then you're having dot offset int row, 0 strt. That is, you are just asking it to print that value over there. So initially, like when your int row is here, once it becomes 1, so you know that you have to offset by 1 row and 0 columns. So if you were here initially, if you're offsetting by 1 row, you'll come to 2, and 0 columns means you're going to stay here itself. So it's going to be A2. And the next time when you again run the loop, then your int row would be 1 and it would become 2. So when it becomes 2, this would be 2. So it'll be 2, 0. So that means it would go from here to here. So like that, like it will print all the values in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down to whatever it generates. That is kind of why you are using this int row over here. And in part H, he wants you, the array int cnt defined in part C will keep track of the number of tickets, so that we have already taken care of. And yeah, so this is the first element of the array. int cnt will count the tickets greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to the first value in your array. Second element will count the tickets greater than the first and second value in varchis. That is what basically I said over here. So you're just trying to find what is less than or equal to 250, what is between 250 and 500, what is between 500 and 750, and what is more than 750, how many number of tickets you're having in that range. Is it just trying to get a count of that and print it over here. So in order to do that, you are again defining a new integer that is just to iterate over your array. So you just have creating a new integer I, which goes from 0 to int n. So we had, so int n was the number of rows, like the upper bound of your array. So 0, 1, 2. So this will go from 0 to 2. That is basically, it will go over like all of these 0. 250 will be a 0, 500 would be a 1, and 750 would be your index 2. So it is just referencing that. And once you open your for loop, you are going to have an if statement there. So if your strt, that is the random number you generated, so one of these numbers here, whatever comes first, whatever is being iterated right now. So if one of these number, if it is less than, so you are starting with int I equal to 0, so it references the first element of your array, so that is 250. So if that is less than or equal to the varchis of int I, so that is, this will be like in the first iteration will be varchis of 0. So it is basically checking if this number, let's suppose you're having 142. So if it's just checking if 142 is less than or equal to the first element of your array, that is 250 here.
Sorry, I wanted to ask a question. So I usually have the when I do my code, I usually have the locals tab open, so it shows me the values what the in real time. So it helps me track better. but I wanted to ask. Sometimes when you do this, it becomes it becomes into I becomes 3. I noticed that. I noticed that for some reason. I thought and I thought it was because it becomes 3, and I wanted to know why that is. It's supposed to go to 2, but then it in some instances it becomes 3, especially if it's higher than um 750.
What did you mean by your int r? Like what?
I. Then like then the int I for the for loop
Mm, mm. I would have to like see it to look at it.
All right, thanks. All right, that's fine. Thank you.
I haven't received an email regarding Zoom link. That would be sent out before 12 noon tomorrow. Okay, so yeah. So we are checking if that value is less than or equal to this. What is the bounds for those, and trying to print the number of times it appears on this column. So once you do that, so you want to get the count. So that is why int cnt of int I, that is for the first index, that is 0, would be, it was initially 0, so 0 plus 1, so 1. So that is your count basically. And then you're exiting your for loop. If it satisfies the condition, you exit your for loop. And once you're done with that, you are going to do a next here. So that tells it to go into the next iteration of the for loop. So for next int I, so once you're done with 0, it tells it to go to 1. And the next int I would be to go into 2 until you reach int n. And this line over here, this if int I is greater than int n, and again, like the same thing here, this is because we need to have this additional row over here, which counts what is greater than 750. That is why you have another extra line here after your for loop, because you want something for your third row. So that is why it is there. And so we said it was a do until loop. So this is one of the way you can write your do until loop. So do, and then you're doing all of this, and you're looping it until strt is equal to strw. That is until, so strw was the winning 3-digit number. So that is what I said, like you would be generating a random number until you have this number among them. So the loop would continue to do that till you get this number there. So that is why you have loop until this is equal to this. And coming to part J, the sub will then write in column A, and skipping one line after the last ticket generated, the number of tickets that had to be generated or purchased to get a winning ticket, the sub will then write in the cell to the right tickets to win. That is what we saw earlier, the 1,372. Yeah. So here we just generated 151 random numbers. So it said it will write in column A. So this is a column A, and it said skipping one line after the last ticket generated. So last ticket generated is 254. So you're skipping one line. So you skip this and you come here. And next to it, to the right, you're going to have tickets to win. So this is how it should look like. And for that, you're doing offset int row plus 2. Since int row, with this int row here, we were actually like counting the number of rows initially. So as you generated one number, you were counting the number of times you had generated a random number. So you actually have a count of how many random numbers you have. So that is why you're not having to use Excel down or anything here to specify that range. So you have the count. So you are just offsetting those many rows, and you're remaining the same column. So that's why, because you're still in A, that's why it's a 0 here. And you're just filling in that number. And again, you're just again referencing and printing tickets to win over there in the column to the right. And in part K, the sub will write in cells D2, D3, the values in the array Varhist, and in cells E2, E3, and yeah, so the values in the array int, cnt, which was a dynamic array. So the number of elements in the array will become one more than the number of elements. So yeah, obviously, because we had specified initially we were asked to give an n+1, so it is going to have one more than your previous array. So we are just basically, initially we had just generated those two arrays, like we never had it printed. So we are just trying to get these numbers on here. That is why you are having this block of code over here. So that is, again, you're referring to an index I equal to 0 to int n, that is your upper bound initially, upper bound index initially. So again, you're offsetting and you're just trying to print it there. That's just what you're doing. And again, you have a line beyond your next so that it prints this extra number over here. And then you're done with this. Have any questions on this one?
Could you go over how you put the button?
It's just you go to a developer tab open. You have an insert here and just put a button. Just draw a button.
All right, cool. I thought I was losing my mind.
Yeah, and you just have to like reference it properly. Like choose like whatever sub you have named it. So this is lottery, so give lottery and click OK.
Thank you.
Now coming to problem 3, this is comparatively fairly simple. Yeah, so here, so you're having a worksheet labeled problem 3. It has several cells with different values. You are writing a variant function named average square root using VBA. So what we're basically trying to do here is to define a custom function. So generally, like when you want to do something in Excel, like you want to take a sum, you just do this. So these are like already predefined functions. So you are trying to create something of this sort to work in your worksheet. So you are trying to create something which is like average square root. This is the thing which you're trying to create. It doesn't exist because this code has already run once. That's why you see it there. So this is what you're trying to create. So whenever like someone types something like average square, so whenever like someone types average square root of and they just pick a range like this, it should basically give you these values. Like even if I have like another number here and I specified my range as this, it should like give me a value for the entire range. So you are trying to create your custom function in this case, so that it works. So if you read your problem statement carefully, you can see that the function average square root should receive a range variable as an argument, and it should return a variant. So right in the question statement, you can see like two things are specified. So it has to receive a range variable as an argument. And that is what we are doing here. So the function statement structure is like function, you just write function over there. And then whatever name you want to give to your function. So here we're just naming it as average square root. So that is a name. And whatever comes in the bracket is the argument. So he said we need to have a range variable as an argument. That is, so we're just giving range x as range. So this range x is basically what I just selected. So like if some user were to select some range like this, so this would be the range x. Like if a user was specifying something like b2 to b6, so that would be the range x. So that is basically your argument. And then it should return a variant. So that is why your function, that is why you're having an as variant here. So this is what it returns. So your input would be a range variable and your output is a variant. So it can be a number, decimal, or something. So in part A, the function average square root should receive a range variable as argument and should return a variant. The passing range variable will be a range that points to the cells that contains the value to be average. That is basically what I just said. Like it's just the range variable would just reference to this. And in part B, the function should use a for each loop to go through each of the values in the range passed as the argument. So here we are just telling that we need to have a for loop. And if someone selects this range, you want your for loop to go through each and every single value in this. So it has to like cover 26, 21. If they selected the entire thing, it has to like select each of the values in this entire range, and it has to like iterate over each of these values. So that is what is said over there. To go through, you have to use a for loop to go through each of the values in the range parsed as the argument. So range passed as the argument is what you have selected, and you are using a for loop. So that is for each C in range X. So we have defined C as a range variable here. So yeah, so for each C in your range X, so it will like pick each number in the entire range which the user has specified. It will like pick each one of it. And we also like specified two other variables here, S and N. And these are something which we are going to use in our calculation. So we're just initializing it with N equal to 0 and S equal to 0. And this column, which you see over here, it's like a delimiter. Like in C++, if you would have this thing, semicolon, and here in VBA, you use a column. So that is what it's just telling like these are two different statements. That's all. And so in part B, you're going over each and every number you have there. So he has, so over here he's given if one or more of the values in the range passed to the function are invalid. That is what we are deeming as invalid here is if it is negative or if it is not numeric. So if you had a negative number or if you had some text like A, B, C, D or something over there, so that would be deemed as invalid. And we need to like tell our user that you are having an invalid entry over there. So that is what it's telling me. The function will return the text error, check your data and cell address. So cell address is wherever you are having the error. So it's just basically when you look at this example given here. So here in your C4, you are having an ampersand. So it is not a numeric variable. It's not a number. So you won't be able to do the calculation. So you just want to tell your user that you don't have a legit variable over there and you need to change it. And you're just telling a user where it is located. So that is what check your data and cell address. So address is basically what the cell is. So it's like, and there's an absolute referencing. So it's C4. And here in the question, like he has told you that you can use the A1 reference style, so you don't have to worry about R1C1. So that is what you're trying to do here. So if is numeric basically looks if that entry is a numeric, if it's a number or not. So if is numeric is equal to false, that is if it is not a number, then your average square root should return error, check your data in cell and c.address. So dot address is the way you try to get the address of a cell. So wherever the C was located, so in our example, it was at C4. So it would just basically give you that it is C4 and it will look like this.
Can you repeat that last part? What does dot address do?
Address just tells you where, like, suppose you had this range selected and if you didn't have a number here, like you didn't, suppose you had a letter over there and it's not a number. So your program is going to run, and it found that this is not a number. That is why you have a if statement over there is numeric. So it found it's not a numeric type of variable that you've got here. So now you're just trying to tell your user that it is not, and you're trying to tell him where it is. So it is in B4. So address just gives you that it is in B4. So if you put dot address, it just gives you where it's located. Does that answer? I don't think I heard you. And in case, like if he had, so in this question, he is asking you to use the A1 reference style. So suppose in a different question, he asked you to use the R1C1 reference style. In that case, what would happen is the C.address, it would just change like this. It would become reference style. And you put a dot, a column, and you put Excel R1C1. So if he ever asks you to use and refer it using an R1C1 reference style instead of A1, you can just use this thing. So if you look up like the Microsoft documentation on .address, you'll find the different styles you can, the different reference styles you can use for this thing. So here is just A1 reference style, so you can just keep it as C.address, and it's just going to give you whatever you
But
require.
how does it know where to put this message? Because like you haven't really how do I say offset it to anything or anything like that. How is it just how does it know where to put it? Like is there something that you have to define?
Yeah, because it would know where it should be put, because your user is basically entering it like this. He's just going to enter a function here
Oh, okay.
that is just going to come
Okay.
up.
Okay. Yeah.
And once you're done with this, you're exiting the function. And the other thing is, if it is negative, we have to say it's an error again. So that's why using an else if statement. So if it is not numeric, you said it's an error. If it is negative, so if it's negative, it would be numeric. So that's why you have to specify a new command here. So if C is less than 0, that is, if it's negative, then again, you're giving the same thing as an error. And if both of the conditions satisfy, if it's not negative and if it is a number, then you proceed to do the calculation. So here we have like two variables, n and s. We're doing n equal to n plus 1. So that is basically when you do, so we are trying to find the average square root. So average square root is basically you're finding the square root of each of the variables, each of the numbers you've got here, and you're trying to take the entire average of it. So in that case, like you need to have the values for the square root of each of these. You need to sum them up, and you need to divide by the total number of entries you have here. So that total number of entries is what we are intending to get with this variable n over here. So that so once you have accepted one, like once you go over each element, like once you're done with this, you're adding, we start with n equal to 0. So once it's done with this, checking this number, it's going to have 1. Once it's done checking the second number, n is going to be 1 plus 1, that's 2. And then it would basically give you the total count of the numbers inside your range. And for s equal to s plus sqr of c, so sqr of c is what calculates the square root. And again, since we are initializing with 0, so for the first number, it's going to be s is equal to 0 plus the square root of that. And as you proceed through each number, it's going to take the sum of it. Like it will first find the square root of this number, and then when it comes here, it will add the square root of this number to whatever you had previously. And when it comes here, it just adds the square root of this number to the previous sum you had of these two. So and as it loops over, it ends up it ends up summing over all the square roots of all these numbers. That is what is happening here. So you're ending this, and next is like you're telling it to go on to the next number in your range. And in part D, if all the cells contain numbers greater than 0, then the function will return the average of the square root of the value. And the function should work for any range. So, yeah, so we want to ensure that we have at least like more than, so if all cells contain numbers greater than 0, so you're just ensuring that you are having like more than 0 here. And then in that case, it would calculate the average square root as S by N. So as I said earlier, S is the sum of all the square roots, and N is the total number of entries you have within your range. So it's basically giving the average of all the square roots of the numbers in your range. And if this case is not satisfied, that is why you're having an else over here. So it will give you an average square root equal to 0. And that is what this is. Any questions on this one?
Why is it C dot address? I'm confused about that.
That is just the way you write it. Like C is like you have for each C in range X. So we had like defined a variable C initially. So that's what you're saying. Like you're just trying for each C in range X is basically each variable within your range. So that's just like referencing.
I'm dumb. I didn't see that it was a range. I'm sorry.
And then for question 4. This one is a bit messed up, so yeah. So here you want to write a VBA code that does the following. So when the Excel file opens, call a sub that makes the worksheet problem 1 the active worksheet and places the cursor in cell A1. And you need to define a variable called n_changes that keeps track of the number of selection changes made in the worksheet problem 3 since the last time it was selected. And you need to write 2 event handlers. One is to initialize the n_change counter every time the worksheet problem 3 is activated, and another to record the number of times changes made. And when the workbook is about to be closed, show a message box that reads the number of changes made in the last visit to the worksheet problem 3. Where hash # stands for the number of changes made in the worksheet problem 3 during the last time it was active. So here what we're doing is, so first thing we need to do is when the file opens, you need to have a sub which makes the worksheet problem 1 as your active worksheet, and you need to place a cursor in A1. So in each one of this, you have so here, like in your Excel objects, here you are having this workbook here. So here, so it said like when you on the question, it said that whenever you open the Excel file, so that is whenever you open the Excel workbook, you have to make problem 1 as the active sheet. So this workbook, so here it's referring to the entire workbook, so that is the entire thing. So whenever the workbook opens, so each one here is like specifically referring to like each of the worksheet in it, like problem 1, problem 2, problem 3, and the sheet rubric. And this workbook is something what you would use if you want to give something like globally for the entire workbook. So when since the question says that you need to have it when the Excel file opens, it means when the workbook opens. So you have your workbook, and here you have the set of commands which you can change. So we need our code to run when the file opens. So that's why you're putting open here. And then here you are typing it in. So when it opens, that is like private sub workbook underscore open. So it's telling like when the workbook opens, it's just referring to that. And you are calling the function opening. So this function opening is what you are defining in the module here. And opening has a spelling mistake. Yeah, so you are defining a sub here, which is called opening, and you're telling it to activate. You have to make the worksheet problem one as the active worksheet, and you have to place your cursor in the cell A1. So basically that's what you're doing. So you're just doing P1 activate. So it just activates your problem one as, and you're saying range A1 select. So it's just asking to select the cell A1. And also here in part B, you have to define a variable n changes that keep track of the number of selection changes made in the worksheet problem 3. So in your problem 3, and you have to write 2 event handlers, one to initialize the n change counter every time the worksheet problem 3 is activated, and another to count every change that has been made. So you can open your problem 3, and here you're typing the code. So it's like generally like when you open it, stay in general, so you have to make it a worksheet. And here it's like P3. So in our question said whenever you activate, like whenever someone opens problem 3, so you're coming to workbook and we're selecting P3 and the worksheet P3, and among these you are taking activate. So that is what this is, worksheet activate. That is how you refer to this thing. And you're initializing a variable n changes equal to 0. And over here, like you had defined n changes, and you put a public n changes as integer because public means you are making the variable available to every other sheet in your code. Earlier, we would just do it for the specific sheet wherever you're working on, but now like you wanted to go to, like you want the variable to be global among all the sheets in your workbook. So that's why you're using public over there. So it's like you're defining a global variable basically. So you're writing public n changes as integer. So you have defined your variable here, and now in problem 3, you're specifying what happens when you activate problem 3. So this is the problem 3, and your private sub worksheet activates once you act. So it's telling Excel that once the problem 3 worksheet is activated, you're initializing n changes to 0, and yeah, so it counts so that is what it's saying here, 1 to initialize the n changes counter every time it is activated. So basically what we are trying to do here is we are just trying to count, like, so when someone opens this worksheet, we want it to open to this sheet and the select and the cursor to be at A1. So that is what we accomplished in our first set of tasks what we did in the part A. And then what you next want to do is whenever you have a user open up problem 3, the worksheet 3, you want whatever changes he makes. So you want to count the number of changes he has made over here. And once he closes problem 3 and he moves on somewhere, and when he comes back to problem 3 again, you want it to like initialize to 0 again. So you're just counting the number of new changes a person makes every time he activates a problem 3. So that is why you want to initialize the n change counter every time worksheet problem 3 is activated. So every single time a person moves over to worksheet problem 3, you're trying to count the number of new changes he makes. So that is why you have on here for problem 3, you have upon activating the worksheet, you are initializing n changes to 0. N changes was the integer variable which you had defined as something which is a global variable for all the worksheets. And next part is you need to have another event handler, which is to record the count of every change that is made in the worksheet problem tree. So in order to do that, so you're doing private sub worksheet selection change by, you can just use this as such. That is just a way of telling Excel that you just have to take care of, like, it's basically a selection change. So when something, whatever happens, like, it's just telling Excel, like, something happens in the sheet that you have to keep track of it. Like whenever like someone selects something new or changes something, that is what is selection change. So that's what you're having a selection change here. So worksheet underscore selection change. And then you're telling like, and then your n changes would change to n changes +1. So every time someone opens the sheet and changes something, moves over, you are just basically counting, like, I'm here right now, 26. I changed this to 79. I made 2 changes. And again, like, I moved this thing. I made another change, so that's like 4. So it's just basically counting the number of changes. So every time someone changes something, it's just counting +1. And then in part 4, so when the workbook is about to be closed, show a message box that reads number of changes made in the last visit to problem 3 is equal to. And this is again, if you remember your number formatting, it's just if there's a significant variable, it just prints it. Yeah, so hash, is the yeah, so the pound sign is the number of changes made in the worksheet problem tree. So whenever like someone closes the entire workbook, it needs to show that. So that is why again in this workbook, you are having another sub over here that is here, like this work. It is in this section where you have this workbook, so it refers to the entire workbook. So here again, workbook, you have before close, that is before closing. So that's why you're defining private sub workbook underscore before close. And cancel is the Boolean, like, I'll come to this. So you're having a workbook before close. So when you so you're just printing a message box which tells the user the number of changes that has been made. So it just prints the n changes number which you have. So if I try, like, so if I try closing this, it gives me the number of changes made in the last visit to problem 3 was 10. So I probably like went on this and clicked here like some 10 times. And if I cancel it, it asks if I should save it or not. So like cancel is like just a yes or no. And if I click OK, it just comes back to the same thing. So that is what it does. So to summarize problem 4, so he wants you to have something which runs when your Excel file opens. So that is what you're having here. So you are telling it when it opens, you have to call this function called opening, which you have defined in your module 4. And once this is done, you are telling, you need to define, he's asking you to define a variable called n changes. So you are defining a global variable which applies over the entire workbook. And then he asks you to initialize it every time someone changes something in problem, when someone activates problem 3 and when someone changes something in problem 3. So that is what you write here for problem 3. You're writing when someone activates it, you have to initialize it to 0. And whenever someone makes a change in it using selection change, you are just adding the count by +1. And then he's saying, like, when the workbook is about to be closed, show a message box which counts, which tells the user what were the number of changes that were made. So that is again, you're putting it in the workbook part because it applies to the entire workbook. So that's why you're putting it here again. Private sub workbook before closing. The message box is equal to the number of changes made in the last visit. Do you have any questions on that?
I'm sorry, I don't know if you mentioned this already, but can you remind me again how you know when to use a private sub?
Hmm. So private sub is like it's kind of like you have a sub where so if you are like using a private sub within okay, you're using a private sub here, so it means that only this particular part can execute it, the other parts can't call it. So if you're having a private sub in problem 3, it means it's just for problem 3 and the rest of them, they can't use it, they can call it. It just applies to this particular problem and nobody else can use it. Like the other modules cannot call to it. It's just wherever you're typing it, it just remains there. It can only be executed in that one.
Okay.
I have a question. For the module or like this workbook, it says cancel as Boolean, and then on the problem 3 worksheet, it says the by val target as range. What are those? Like, what did they do and what do they mean?
Yeah, so that was in problem 3. Yeah, so cancels Boolean is like if it is false, it means like when the event occurs. And like if so, it actually like if you put cancel as Boolean, like if it is true, like the close operation would stop and the work will it will be like still left open.
So do we like, I feel like it wasn't specified in the question. Is that something we just like have to do?
It's like if you have like specified like something, like if you had something like some new lines over here would say like if something is like equal to false, then save it. Or like if you're like specifying something new over there, that is where like if you add something else over there, so it will just do those things before you close it.
Okay, and then the other one?
Let me do the one.
It's on the problem 3 under the objects.
Oh, the by val target is range, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is like so here you're telling to do a selection change. So sometimes like when you are trying to use this thing, you can like specify a particular range, like you can like tell it to like look for some specific areas in the worksheet. So, and in that case, you would like specify like as a next line, you would specify target equal to like this particular part of the worksheet. So that is why you use it. So in, like when you don't specify anything, it just takes the whole thing.
Okay, and then my last question was from the dropdown, when you put like selection change or whatever, the name of the sub, is that what you're selecting, or does it automatically do that, or like?
Creates like something, like you select something is just, select changes just create, like it just creates the whole thing for you. Like it just saves you from typing.
Oh, okay. And so when I guess when he like made the answers, is that like how he did it, or did he like type it and then it popped up in the dropdown?
He can like, you just have to like open something like here, and just like generally, like when you open something, it will stay in general. So when you want to type something here, you come to worksheet and then you do this. It just gives you a new sub over there. Like it just does the work for you.
Okay, thank you.
It just gives you the basic syntax. And if you want to make changes to it, you can just do that. Like if you want to write a target there, you can write a target. Or if you want a particular, like some 2 different rows to be a target, you can just specify the target is going to be this. So it just gives you the syntax there. It just makes it like.
Thank you.
In the other one, the private worksheet, it says like cancel as Boolean. What does that mean exactly?
Oh, that's what I said. Like, whether or not, like, if it has to remain, like, whether running that code, if it has to like remain within, like, if it has to leave, like, if it is for, where do we have it? Yeah. So before close, like, it's cancel as Boolean. So it's like if you want it to remain open, or do you want it to like do something before it closes? So that is what it is. Like you'll be like writing some more statements after that, like if you wanted to do something else.
So is cancel just a variable name? Is that all, or?
Cancel is like true or false over there. It's just, that's a Boolean.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I'm finding it hard to follow like how you did number 4, because I'm finding it hard to find all the pages you're talking about. They all seem to open like different kinds of pages if you change it to workbook.
You want me to like close everything and open and sheet?
No. I'm not saying that you should. No, I'm not saying you should close everything. I'm like, okay, so like let me. I was trying to figure out number. So part 4 was, sorry, problem 4. Give me a second. I was trying to figure out how to do the calculation for the number of changes, but then what page is that exactly?
Oh, okay. So that is in problem 3, the object for problem 3, when you click on this thing
Oh, give
over
me a
here.
second. All right, problem 3.
Yeah, you come to problem 3, and when you open, it would be here. Like it will look like this. It would be general. So make that into worksheet and then start picking whatever you want to do here.
Okay. No, but okay. So what I was seeing, doesn't it just add to it if you pick it, right? It just adds to it, right?
Yeah, it would add to it. Like it's just that like if it was still a general, you would have to like actually type it out. If you put it in worksheet and just click on something, it'll just add a code to it. So it just makes it simpler for you.
Okay. So if it wasn't a calculation, what else would you say that he might ask us? Like any questions? Like, okay, so I'm not trying to ask you for something. What else could he ask us if he was trying to make it something kind of difficult?
Possibly like small changes. Like what I felt like from his previous test, it was almost like he kind of gave something which is very similar to the practice exam. So I think like it will be a good idea. Like you have a really good idea on what's on here.
Okay.
And if you were to make some small changes, maybe like something I said like here, like as I said, like here he says for address use the A1 reference style. It's possible like he can ask you like for address use the R1C1 reference style.
Oh
So
wow.
it would be like changing the statement a bit.
And then you just do reference. Wait, what is it? Bracket reference style, R1C1.
Yeah. So it's right bracket.
Reference.
UC1.
Is it
Yeah.
reference style?
Yeah. So reference style equal to Excel, and you would for Excel R1C1. You would have reference style as Excel reference style equal to R1C1. Like it depends. Like if you look up this there are like different ways in which you can specify this. Sometimes like you want the row to be absolute, you want the column to be absolute, but I don't think like he's going to go into that detail. But if you like look at the Microsoft documentation for that, you can like clearly understand that the various reference style you can use and whether or not you want it to be. See here. So this is what we are currently using. So this is giving you an absolute reference to the cell A1. And if you're giving MC address in the bracket, you're giving row absolute equal to false. It's just, so you're, it's just going to cancel, it's going to give you $A1. So one of it is absolute and the other one is not absolute. And if you're using a reference style for R1C1, you just have to put reference style equal to Excel R1C1. And if you don't want it to be absolute, you can give row absolute false, column absolute false. So when it is not absolute, it gives you brackets. So that's what you get.
All right, thank you.
And also like you can look up for things in your homework, like here, like this part of it, it's the same as your bins problem in your homework. So like maybe like he could like incorporate some parts like that into it.
Mm-hmm.
And also from your previous exams, a lot of people like lost their marks on very trivial things, which was like told in the instructions and mentioned in the rubric. So we didn't have an option but to cut the marks on that. So just be like careful, like you read the question statement properly. Like if you actually like do notice, like if you have to write your name somewhere, or
it's not that we don't read it, it's just that we're worried about the time, I think. Most of the time we just start coding because we want to be as fast as possible so we can get on to the next question and finish.
Yeah, so it was like I felt like bad cutting marks for that, but I didn't have an option. So just like be careful about like don't forget to like place a button on there and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can also like look over, I think in one of the homeworks you had somewhere where you were using a step function in a for loop. If you wanted to like skip iterating over some specific values, so you could look up that on how it works. Like you can like look for all of these, like for the do loop, for loop and stuff like that. So you can look up the various way in which the syntaxes can be given. So you have an idea, like if he asks you to change something, you would have an idea on how you should change it. So like different ways it can be put. So like whatever code you're referring to, like even if it's the class notes, you can look up each line in the code and see what it does so that you can be sure like you understand it clearly, like what it does. And whenever you have some calculation, like the one which we had over here in the in problem 3, like here you were asked to find the average square root. So before you come up with the code, like you can actually write down what an average square root would actually do. Because last time, like he asked for the, I think this product of the sum, and everybody did a sum product, which was the opposite. So whenever like something like that comes up, so just give it a minute and write it down and see what it turns out to be. Like try to write down and understand what you're supposed to do before you start writing the code so you don't confuse. Any other questions?
Is this going to be on eCampus?
Yeah, but actually I missed a little bit in the beginning, like a bit before problem 2. So I think like problem 1 won't be there. Maybe you could refer to Hayes' session for that one. but the rest of it will be there. Any more questions, or can we close the session?
I'm good. Thank you.
Welcome. All right, have a good day.